Hey everybody, in today's video we're going to be taking a look at the newest addition to the Z range of cameras, and that is the Nikon Z5. Yes, I will be showing you sample images, and yes, I will be showing you sample video, so let's get started. Okay, so before we start talking about this Z5, I do need to make all of you aware that this is a pre-production unit. Anything we're going to talk about today, anything I show you today is all been based on this pre-production unit. So if there's something that doesn't look quite right, or if there's something that doesn't look right to you, then please do keep in mind this is not a final production unit. This is a sample, and it should be treated as such. So kind of treat the images with a grain of salt. Things might change, noise performance. For some of my more serious tests, when I want to compare lenses and when I want to compare high ISO, I'm not going to be doing that in this video because I want to wait for a full production unit so that I can give you guys a true representation of what you would get from the camera that you get in a box. So hopefully that makes sense. And I'll also, when I show you some of the sample images, I'll put that they're taken on a pre-production camera as well. So please, please, please do keep that in mind. Okay, so I've been lucky enough to be able to shoot with the Nikon Z5 for the past couple of weeks now, and it's allowed me to use it in a couple of different situations. I've used it in really low light situations, and I've also used it in kind of out and about daytime situations as well. So I'm going to show you some of those examples. I'll also talk to you about the specification of the camera, things that you guys might be interested in, things that you might not know about, and just show you kind of what this camera is all about and try and give you as much information as I can. Okay, so let's start with specifications, some of the technical specs of this camera itself. So we have a 24 megapixel full frame sensor. On that sensor is 273 autofocusing points. They're obviously phase detect autofocusing points. We can use this camera from an ISO of 100 all the way up to 51,000 if we need to, and we'll have a frames per second of about 4.5 frames per second. The Z5 also has in-body stabilization to the same degree that the Z6 and the Z7 does. On the outside of the camera, it's going to look very similar to what you're used to from a Z6 or a Z7. If you're using a Z6 and a Z7 right now, the Z5 on the back of the camera at least is going to look identical to the camera that you already have. So we still have the AF toggle, we still have the AF on button, the button layout on the back of the camera is exactly the same. The only difference between a Z6 and a Z5, for example, on the outside of the camera is that you no longer have a top plate display. So now what you'll have is you'll have that mode dial over on the right hand side of the camera rather than being on the left hand side of the camera like it is on a Z6. But everything else is in the same place. The control dials, the ISO button, the function buttons, they're all in the same place. So especially if you're adding this as a second camera, or if it's a camera that's going to allow you into the Z series range, it's going to be something that's going to be easy to get used to, especially from a Nikon user's point of view. And one of the biggest things that a lot of people liked about the Z6 and the Z7 was the ergonomics, was the button layout. So the fact that the Z5 has kept those good ergonomics, really nice big grip, easy to hold onto, and the same button layout is going to work in its favor. In terms of the camera's viewfinder, the viewfinder is the same viewfinder that you'll find in the Z6 and the Z7, which means it's incredibly high resolution, the quality of it is going to be fantastic. And it also means you don't really have to sacrifice. So the high resolution viewfinder is still going to be really good quality. You don't have to take a lower resolution viewfinder, for example, because you're not buying a higher end model. One thing that is unique about the Z5 is that actually it's the only camera in the Z series range that has dual card slots. So it has two SD card slots. Both of those are able to take a UHS 2 speed card if you need to. Although this camera doesn't really shoot that fast though, so obviously a maximum frames per second, as I mentioned, of 4.5 frames per second. And with a UHS 2 card, there's effectively no buffer either. It will just continuously fire and fire and fire and fire, even in RAW and JPEG. So I've done some tests in RAW, I've done some tests in RAW and JPEG, but there's effectively a limitless buffer, and obviously that's caused by the slower frame rate. If it was a faster firing frame rate, then maybe we would hit into a buffer, but I've not experienced any buffering issues on this camera at all. The camera body itself is weather sealed. It feels really nicely built, just like the 6 and the 7 does. So it's not like you're sacrificing on build quality either. There are a couple of extra panels where there isn't quite a rubber coating like there is on a 6 and a 7, but other than that, the weather sealing of the camera is great. There is no in-body flash, so if you are looking for a camera body that has an in-body flash, this is not going to be the camera for you. The Z5 will take the same batteries that you're used to using in the Z6, the Z7, the D850, all that type of stuff, but it will actually ship with a newer type of battery, and the only difference is that newer type of battery can be continuously powered via USB-C. Now, unfortunately, at the time of me recording this, I don't have that newer battery, so I can't test that. But as soon as I get access to one of those newer batteries, I can definitely try that out for you and see how that works. But that new EN-EL15C is going to allow the Z5 to be continuously powered via USB-C on the left-hand side. To really hammer home the fact that the body is very similar to a Z6 and Z7, there's a couple of accessories that you can use with this camera that were designed for the Z6 and Z7. The first one I already have on here, which is a Zelda made by a company called Three Legged Thing. This is an L bracket, and this was originally designed for the Z6 and Z7, and it fits perfectly. All the seams line up, so I can use the flip-out screen if I want to. All the ports are still accessible. So if you've got a L bracket that's designed for a Z6 and a Z7, that should fit a Z5. Obviously, there's going to be variations depending on different brands. This is the only brand that I've tried. And also, the Nikon MB-N10, the battery pack for the Z6 and Z7 that allows you to put two batteries on either side, that fits perfectly well and works perfectly well on the Z5 as well. So, especially if you're an existing Z6 or Z7 user and you wanted a second body, a Z5 could fit quite nicely in terms of accessories, battery packs, things like that. Now, you might be sitting there wondering, well, this camera sounds an awful lot like a Z6, obviously apart from the memory card slots, but there's a couple of things that are very similar. However, where the Z5 and the Z6 differs is when it comes to video. So if you are interested in the video specifications of a Z5, it can record in 4K at 30 frames per second. However, it will not do that in full frame. There is a 1.7 times crop applied when you're recording in 4K at 30 frames per second. Also, there's no option available for Full HD 120 frames per second. The fastest you can shoot is Full HD at 60 frames per second. Also, on the video front, there's not going to be any 10-bit external recording, 422 or anything like that like you get with the Z6. There's no N-Log. There's not going to be the ability to add RAW or anything like that. So quite clearly, the Z5 has been designed for photographers, people that are interested in stills photography. Quite clearly, if you had an interest in video, the Z5 might not be the camera that you would look at. You would obviously maybe look at a Z6 because of the advantages in video that a Z6 gives you. I still see tons and tons and tons of comments where people say, I don't care about video, I just want a stills camera. This camera is designed mainly for stills photographers. Now, it obviously will do video, and I think the video quality and the video that you'll get out of this is going to be good enough for just everyday use. But it's not going to be good enough, especially if someone wants to shoot with a Z6 or if they want to do high-end external recording. That's where you're going to look at a Z6 instead of a Z5. So firstly, I took the Z5 out around London, shooting at night, getting some low light kind of cityscape shots, a mixture of handheld and tripod shots as well. The camera performed really nicely in low light. There's a couple of things I'd always mention when using any Z camera really in low light is that you'd always need to make sure that low light autofocus is turned on. It makes a huge difference when you're shooting in low light situations on a Z series camera. And when it's using low light autofocus, it will actually give you a little prompt on the screen that it's using low light autofocus. It makes the accuracy much better in low light situations. I was using it a mixture of handheld on tripod. I've got a mixture of different shots that I can show you. when I have a final production sample is I want to compare the ISO performance against the Z6. I kind of feel like the Z6 is still going to be better because of the different sensor technology in the Z6. It's a backside illuminated sensor, whereas this one is not. So I do feel like the Z6 will still be better at higher ISOs, but that's a test that I want to do when I get a final production version of a Z5. But in terms of my experiences with this camera, it was great in low light, worked fantastically well. I was happy with the results that I got, and I was happy with the kind of the shooting experience as well. There was nothing that really kind of jumped out to me as if to say, oh, you know, that was different from my Z6 or that was different from my Z5. I then decided to kind of take this out for a walk just around my kind of local area, couple of different lakes, couple of different things. I tried a magnitude of different subjects like birds in flight. It worked fantastically well with all the different lenses that I used with it. So I had a couple of shooting situations with the 500mm 5.6. This is kind of my go-to f-mount lens for wildlife. So I used my 500mm 5.6, obviously with the FTZ, and everything worked the way that I expected it to work. And the one thing I would say is that the autofocus of the Z5 is essentially what the autofocus of the Z6 was or is when it got to firmware version 3. So the changes have been made to allow you to adjust how the subject tracking works, and also you have animal IAF straight away in the camera ready to go. So they're already in here, you don't have to update the firmware, they're already in here. And it works quite well for the everyday just walking around. Now, the reason I didn't get shots that I was really happy with is because there wasn't much happening. Most things just wanted to fly away from me on that day. So I got a couple of good shots, but nothing too exciting. So I'll show you those samples, but don't expect masterpieces of wildlife photography because it wasn't an ideal shooting location. In terms of other lenses that I've tried it with, it works really nicely with the 24-200. I do think that actually there'll be a lot of people that will be interested in this camera with that 24-200 because it gives you just that all-in-one setup. For people who want the smallest and lightest kit they can get in a full frame camera system, that's obviously where the new Z lens comes in, which is what's going to be part of this kit with the Z5, and that is the new 24 to 50. So this lens is quite small. For a full frame zoom lens, it is really small. It's about half the size of the 24 to 70 f4, which is already a relatively small full frame lens. It does extend slightly, and it will have one of those lockdown zoom rings to make it smaller whilst you're traveling. But this is a really tiny lens. And one thing I do think is that actually existing people who already have a Z6 and a Z7 are going to be interested in this lens in particular if they wanted something small for a walk around. One video that I do definitely want to do is I want to compare this lens against the 24 to 70 f4 to see what the picture quality difference is like in terms of sharpness and corner sharpness. So we're definitely going to be doing that. Obviously, because this lens is so small, it is a little bit dark. So it's an f4 to a 6.3. So when it hits that 50 millimeters, it does hit f6.3. But it's one of those sacrifices, just making the lens smaller and lighter. And I think it looks quite nice with the lens hood on it as well, which always helps. And the lens hood is reversible, so if you want to store the lens hood on the lens itself, you can do. I have done a number of size comparisons as well, so you can compare this body against the Z6 body, you can compare it against different sizes of lenses, and I've also done a couple of size comparisons of this lens against some other lenses as well, so you can see how small this lens is compared to some of the lenses you might already have. I'll put those at the end of the video, so make sure you stick around for them if you're interested in the size comparisons, seeing this kit next to kit that you might have at home to give you a better idea of how small or how lightweight this lens is, for example. So who's the Z5 for? Obviously, it's an entry-level full-frame camera. It's for people who want to get into that kind of full-frame camera setup. It might be their first time full frame camera. It might be that they already have one, but they want a second body. And I think the Z5 will make a really nice second body to kind of a Z7, for example. But I also think it's for DSLR users as well. So if you're a D600 user, or you were a D610 user, or a D750 user in some cases, and for whatever reason you didn't want to upgrade to a Z6, maybe a Z5 is what you've kind of been waiting for. It sits right in that portion of the market where the D610 basically sat. So it's a case of it fills that gap below the 750. And I do think there's a lot of 600 users out there that wanted to wait for something like this that they wanted to upgrade to. So one of the reasons that I think a lot of people might be interested in the Z5 as well is it's a great entryway into the Z system glass. We've seen that from the vast majority of my videos that the Z series glass, the 50mm prime, the 14 to 30 zoom, both the 24 to 70s and now the new 24 to 200 are absolutely fantastic lenses that are outperforming their F-mount counterparts. So I do feel like there's a lot more people now that are becoming more aware of how good the Nikon Z system lenses are. Those people might not want a Z6 or a Z7, or they might not want to spend as much as you would have to spend to get into a Z7, for example, and they might find it easier to be able to access the Z system glass by using a Z5, for example. I've had lots of people ask me if they can use Z series lenses on DSLRs, and they can't do that. So obviously you have to have a Z series body, and there's definitely a couple of people out there that want to start making use of those Z series lenses, and the Z5 is definitely one of those ways to do that. I hope that you found this video useful. We've gone over a lot of information and I hope it has been useful to you. If you do have any questions or if there's anything you want to know about the Z5 that I've not talked about in this video, then please do put them in the comments below and I'll try and get back to as many of you as I can. If you're interested in keeping up to date with the Z5 stuff, please do subscribe, because as soon as I get that full production unit, I'm going to be doing comparisons directly against the Z6 and also want to do some comparisons with this 24-50 against the 24-70 and so on. So I don't want you to miss those. If you think you'd be interested in those videos, please do subscribe to the channel. As always, thank you so much for watching. Goodbye.